Hey everybody, John Lorden here with another episode of Itchy Mysteries, and once again, I'm looking to the sky. I'm looking for proof of aliens with today's documentary. This is a new one, just came out in 2017, and I have to give a very big thank you to Laura for letting me know about it. It is called Unacknowledged, and basically I got a lot of suggestions from you guys based off the Stan Romanek one that I reviewed a couple weeks ago. What was that one? Extraordinary, off the review from Extraordinary. So I'm trying to check some of those out. I took a look at Unacknowledged, seemed to have some pretty good reviews on IMDB, and I thought I'd jump into it. So how did it play out? Well, before we get to that part, you know I have to share the synopsis with you. So from IMDB, here is the synopsis for Unacknowledged. Unacknowledged focuses on the historic files of the Disclosure Project and how UFO secrecy has been ruthlessly enforced and why. The best evidence for extraterrestrial contact dating back decades is presented with direct top-secret witness testimony, documents, and UFO footage, 80% of which has never been revealed anywhere else. The behind-the-scenes research and high-level meetings convened by Dr. Stephen Greer will expose the degree of illegal, covert operations at the core of UFO secrecy. From briefings with the CIA director, top Pentagon generals and admirals, to the briefing of President Obama via senior advisor John Podesta, chairman of the Hillary Clinton campaign, we take the viewer behind the veil of secrecy and into the corridors of real power where the UFO secrets reside. The viewer will learn that a silent coup d'etat has occurred dating back to the 1950s and that the Congress, the President, and other world leaders have been sidelined by criminal elements within the military-industrial financial complex. Now, did that summary sound a little too complicated? That's a bit of the problem that I have with this documentary. First of all, the claim in there about it being 80% of things that have never been released before, I certainly didn't feel like that, and admittedly I've looked into this topic for a while, but I felt like there was individual stories that maybe I haven't heard that specific individual story before, but the overall themes that they were representing, that those little stories represent, I have heard time and time again. So yes, there is some information that I can say I have not heard before, but it's nowhere near 80%. It'd probably be more like maybe 30 or 40%. Is there footage in it that I haven't seen before? Yes, but it's not really delved into. The footage is shown almost in this montage fashion where you're just looking at a bunch of clips of different UFOs. You have no idea of the backstories. It's not really taking its time to explain those things to you. The most interesting thing about this documentary is you have Dr. Stephen Greer, and you get a good sense of comfort about trusting him for the information that he's relaying to you. Now, I did look into him a little bit since watching the film, and he does seem to be an up-and-up guy, in my opinion. I feel like the information that he's relaying is valid as it's been told to him. But that's part of the problem with these UFO stories is you're really looking at a daisy chain of information, and once you start chasing that back, the physical evidence isn't always available. Now, this documentary, the premise, well, one of the premises in this documentary has a great reason for that a corporation isn't quite the right word, but some type of group that is working outside of governments, that is actually higher than government, some type of deep, dark group is controlling the flow of information around this. And there's a ton of the information out there, but it's all been contained and concealed, and we really don't have access to it. So largely what this documentary is piecing together the stories of these other people that have been close to that information at some point, and then they're relaying it back. I have to say, comparing this documentary to the last one that I watched, Extraordinary, no comparison at all. I think there is a lot more valid information being presented in this document. But it's coming from a different place. You know, Extraordinary was much more about an individual having his experiences, which of course you guys know I think were highly, highly questionable. This is more about an overarching thesis about this dark cabal or whatever you would call it that is above, working outside of the government. It's weird because it doesn't quite come out and say Illuminati, but you kind of have the feeling while you're watching it, you're like, well, you're talking about the Illuminati, right? But it doesn't quite go that far. However, the film, talking about it from a technical standpoint of actually being a film, really suffers because of this kind of lack of focus. I found that the first half was pretty interesting to me because you're hearing these accounts and you can choose to believe the people or not, but they're interesting stories regardless. The second half of the film kicks into this thing where it's really trying to prove that there is a cover-up going on, and it comes so rapid fire. At some point, I literally had to stop the film because there was just so much talking. There is no room for breathing. There's literally one time in this film where someone is not talking to you, and it really stood out because all of a sudden I was like, oh wow, it's giving me a minute to think. But outside of that, this film will not give you a chance to think. It almost feels like it's jamming the information down your throat, which I really didn't like about it. And I don't feel like it was a lot of information. I feel like it was a few bits of information being repeated over and over and by different people. And because you've now heard 4 or 5 people giving essentially the same opinion, that's supposed to help sway you to one direction or the other. I don't know, it kind of sucks because I really believe in the validity of some of the information that's being presented here. I really wish the filmmaker would have spent more time trying to support that information rather than giving us a rapid fire spray of a bunch of different people with all their little pieces of a story, and then one guy that's connecting the dots for all those pieces and giving us an overarching conspiracy theory. And let me be very clear, by the time you get to the end of this film, if you do decide to watch it, it just wraps up so many different conspiracy theories. You've got JFK assassination, you've got Marilyn Monroe death, you've got 9/11, you've got all these things being woven into this kind of super arching conspiracy theory that is now about hiding the fact that aliens have been visiting our planet. And that's a little bit of a trouble sign for me personally. I don't believe that all conspiracy theories out there are linked. And it's weird because I see it so many times when I'm looking into materials like this where people will try to say, well, that explains the thing that I believe in. So yeah, that's linked to Marilyn Monroe's death. We know that she didn't die of a drug overdose. It's really, the believability for me becomes extremely questionable when that happens. And even if you look at IMDB.com and look through the written reviews, there's like 72 reviews. There are a lot of reviews on this film. I typically don't see that many for documentaries, particularly this close to when they've been released. But you'll find that even in those reviews, people are talking about their conspiracy theory or their college thesis that they think applies to this. And it's really strange because once you put people into that mindset, once you shift them into a conspiracy theory mindset, we all have a story that we want to bring up, and all of a sudden that is what's being talked about instead of the core story, which as I read to you, should have been about proving that aliens exist. And that's kind of what the first part of the documentary starts pointing towards, but it really just loses its way. Outside of that, I have to say the narrator, his name is Giancarlo Esposito. He's a pretty well-known actor. You probably know him as Gus from Breaking Bad. His narration feels completely disconnected. Whenever he starts speaking, I feel like a different documentary is about to start. It seems like his narration was not written at the same time that the rest of the film was put together or something. It really doesn't jive very well, particularly towards the end. It doesn't seem to connect to the material that's being presented. The other thing is I almost stopped it right at the starting credits because there was such an obvious attention grab that really upset me because I've seen it used so many times, time and time again, the exact same thing, which is you play What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong, and then you run a bunch of imagery over it that is showing, people dying and things like that. I think every kid that has done a high school video production class has made that video, and for some reason they decided to make that the start of this film. Completely ham-fisted attention grab. I hated it. And it's the only licensed song that's in the whole thing, and it's really a shame that they blew their money on licensing a song for a cheap gag that you can see time and time again. If you could probably search that on YouTube and run a whole series of videos just watching people do that. And it really just didn't connect to what was being presented, particularly at that point in the documentary, because at that point I thought I was watching something to prove that aliens exist. There's this one little mention that, well, yeah, the aliens exist, but they don't want to deal with our planet too much because of how violent we are. And then here, cue the music, and all of a sudden show images from 9/11 and show people burning themselves and show dead bodies on beaches and show, it was insane. I'm thankful that I stuck through it because I think the rest of the documentary has some very compelling information and is much better than that intro segment. But whoever's responsible for that intro segment did not do this documentary any favors. If I was in a theater, that might have been the point at which I walked out. I just thought it was completely ham-fisted and over the top. And by the end of the documentary, I think the conspiracy theory angle, the conspiracy theory angle is laid on so thick that becomes its own over-the-top thing. It's the stuff that I would expect to see more on a YouTube channel, and probably not a YouTube channel that I would frequent, than a documentary like this that really started from such a good place and by the end just completely drove off the road. So IMDb has it rated at, I think, about a 7.2 or 7.6 or something like that. Someone in the comments on IMDb pointed out that many of the reviews that are being posted there are from new accounts that have been created since this movie was released, and they kind of doubt the rating on IMDb. I can tell you personally, my rating for it is a 5, and I think that's pretty fair. I think there's some compelling information in it, but I think most of you out there will have trouble getting through the whole thing, particularly in the last half hour. I believe a lot of you will bail on this movie and just shut it off. It's not interesting to see them try to whip this into a super theory and attach all these other conspiracy theories. I see the people do that enough on YouTube. But the first half, I do think that there's valid information. I think Dr. Stephen Greer is an interesting person. I really like how he presents his information. But as I pointed out, it kind of shows not a flaw necessarily, but it shows its own mechanics in that he's deferring to other people. They're deferring to proof that they really don't have in hand. And that's part of the problem when it comes to everything about aliens is really we have trouble getting our hands on anything physical to say, look, we can prove they were here. Here it is. But there is some compelling documentation provided, if nothing else here. So I'll turn it over to you guys. 5 out of 10 is what I give it. If you want to check it out, it is on Netflix. You can watch it if you're a subscriber here in the US. I'm not sure about the rest of the world. But, you know, I think a lot of you probably aren't going to enjoy it all that much. You have to be really interested in this topic and really looking for some information to hang in through the structure problems of this documentary. Really should have been like a 1-hour thing. They really should have tried to shave off 40 minutes. I think it would have been lean and mean and left you with a bunch of good questions instead of just all over the place, too many different topics all being woven together, and trying to answer all your questions and push you in a firm direction actually kind of weakens their argument a bit, in my opinion. But tell me what you guys think about it in the comments below. Thank you so much for sticking around with me on this episode of Itchy Mysteries. Hope you're having a great week out there, and I'll see you back here tomorrow on the Lord and Arts channel.